Yeeted off a cliff edge. Not today.
Babes.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Kelsey. I'm the creator of Bite Size Ancient History and a recent graduate of Cambridge University. At university, I studied classics at undergraduate and then Egyptology at master's level. So I've decided to find a way to use this information, and I'm going to be telling you the historical fact and fiction of your favourite films. If this sounds like something you might be interested in, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss out on any others. And of course, don't forget to check out my other socials. Today we're going to be discussing the 2006 movie 300. I'm now going to preface, like I do every single time, that just because I'm saying it's accurate or not accurate is not a commentary on if it's a good film or not. You may be into it, you may not. It doesn't matter whether it's historically accurate. I'm using it as a learning tool. Especially with something like 300, there is a lot of inaccuracies. However, it's a film based on a comic, based on the historical event, so it's tried to stay true to the comic. So it's not so much a commentary on the inaccuracy of the film, but the comic itself, which is fine because what they've done is just taken a period of history and kind of used it as their inspiration and then created this mythical world from it. If you haven't seen 300, don't worry, I'm going to be placing spoiler warnings throughout this video, so it's not going to ruin your viewing experience if you want to watch it after. Generally, I would describe it as an action movie. It's very, very bloody and gory and with quite a lot of nudity, so if you are below the age of like 16, 18, maybe give this one a miss. Like, give the film a miss. You can still watch this video. I'm obviously not going to show any of that.
So let's get into it.
If you've seen any of my other videos, you know we're going to have to do a quick speed summary so everybody is caught up on what's happening. So, 3, 2, 1, go! The film starts with basically each Spartan baby going through a sort of check to see if they are good or if they have any kind of deformities that might impair them. And those that do have these deformities are just yeeted off a cliff edge. The brutality for a Spartan child does not stop there. So around the age of 7, they're taken away from their mother to undergo a sort of training process. And this is pretty brutal. They're actually starved, they're forced to steal their food, and beaten. At the age of 15, we see that they're taken away into the wilderness individually, and they kind of have to fend for themselves, and we see our main character, Leonidas, having to fight off a wolf. It's only when he does this successfully that he can return to Sparta as king. The film then jumps 30 years later, and we see that a Persian envoy has arrived with a message from the king Xerxes. The envoy asks for water and earth, and this is basically code for you need to submit to us. We're gonna be the power over you now. Unsurprisingly, Leonidas is like, hell no, I am not doing that. And this is where you see the famous scene where it's like, this is Sparta! And he pushes him down a well, and messenger dies, all the other envoys. So basically this constitutes war, unsurprisingly, because when you send a messenger and it gets killed, it's not exactly gonna go down very well. So knowing that there's gonna be war, Leonidas goes to a group called the Ephors, and this is 5 men that basically act as a council. He needs their favour and permission basically to go to war, so they consult the oracle, and the oracle says, not today. This is not the day for it. We're going through a festival. This is not the right time. Leonidas goes away in a huff. He's not happy. However, once he leaves, we find out that Xerxes and the Persians have actually bribed the Ephors to say this to him so that he won't go to war and they think he might submit. Once he gets home, he's pretty upset and he's like, well, what can I do? I can't exactly just ignore everything they said. And she's like,
Babes.
try and think outside the box a little bit. And they say this, well, a very intimate scene, which is kind of the tone of the entire film, aside the point. So instead of saying that he's taking an army to war, he hires 300 of his men as his bodyguards for a sort of little trip, little gander, when in reality they're going off to war to fight the Persians. 300 men. Name of the film, obviously. You may think this is not a lot of men to go fight a war, especially against the Persian army, which is humongous. And you're not the only one, as they come across another Greek tribe that are like, what are you doing? He's like, nah, we're all soldiers, we're all trained, we're better than you, we've got this. And they do have it for quite a long time. There were a lot of mini little battles that we see them do very well in. In the process of this, we also come across the character Ephialtes. And he is somebody that has survived being thrown off the cliff as a baby, so he's very disfigured and he wants to join the army to kind of redeem himself and prove his point. And unfortunately it doesn't go down very well with Leonidas. He says, look, I found this like back passageway that could be really useful for us in this war, and he's like,
okay, great.
and he's like, I want to fight for you, and Leonidas is like,
Hun, you can't hold your arm up here. To form our phalanx, we need to have your arm up here to protect everyone.
which is a fair point, but does not go down very well, so he goes off very upset and angry. Once he goes off, unsurprisingly, the Persians spot him and they're like, could we take advantage of this? So they offer him loads of wealth, comforts, and other things. And he says yes, and in exchange he gives them the information that he was going to give Leonidas about this back passageway. So this is giving them Persians a major advantage. Meanwhile, back in Sparta, Leonidas' wife is having some disputes with a man called Theron, who is basically trying to stop the massive council from giving permission to Leonidas to have more men and have a proper war. She kind of speaks in the council to say, look, this is what we need, and he speaks against her, and we find out that he has also been bribed by the Persians. So it was not surprising that he was trying to stop them going to war. Around the same kind of time, Leonidas is invited to meet with Xerxes, so the Persian king. And again, he gives him the offer of like, chill out, you can be like our friend, but we're still gonna have power of you. And Leonidas is like,
Hell no.
you say you're some sort of like all-powerful god king? That is not true. I am gonna make you bleed. I am gonna win this. However, the Persians have this new information, so they sneak around the back, and unfortunately the war starts to go very wrong. And as they see this is happening, he lets all of the men other than these 300 leave, and one messenger to basically say to his wife, I'm not gonna make it. This is the end for me. And it is. They put up a good fight, but not enough. There was a lot of Persians against them and only 300 of them. But before he dies, he does make him bleed and show you are just immortal at the end of the day. Dailos goes back, delivers the message to his wife of he's gone, and then they have the last battle, which is the Battle of Plataea. And this is the one in the history record where the Greeks finally beat the Persians. And that is the end of the film. A little bit of a sad ending, bittersweet because they eventually win, but obviously our main character is dead. So, you win some, you lose some. Okay, let's go back to the very beginning of the film and start to talk about what may have been really historically inspired and what is very much just over-exaggerated comic. So let's talk about this Spartan childhood. Is it really as brutal as they make out? As I said, the film starts with the yeeting of deformed babies off a cliff. So, for a long time, scholars have thought this is true, because in the writings of Plutarch, he states that the Spartans would kind of bring all of their children to the council for a form of inspection, where they would choose if they're good, healthy children that are going to be worthwhile, prosperous soldiers, or if they're just gonna slow them down and then they just get left outside for the wildlife to dispose of. However, recent studies have kind of started to argue this may not be the case, because firstly, Plutarch is writing this 700 years after the event. So ask yourself, how much do you know from 700 years ago that you can say for sure is fact and hasn't just been passed down, over-exaggerated and tainted? Secondly, in his own writings, he also mentions Spartan kings who had some sort of limp or physical impairment. So if we're getting rid of all of these at birth, how is this happening? And the fact that you could be a king with those kind of impairments suggests that society did not view them in a bad or negative way, especially not enough to actually cull them. Thirdly, we also have accounts from Sparta where they're medical documents discussing how you might treat and help adults who have these kinds of impairments, and they're not just wounds from war, but they're actual ongoing physical disabilities that suggest they've been present from birth. And finally, 4, we have archaeological evidence of children which are older than an age of a baby with these kinds of impairments, which suggests we're not getting rid of them. They are allowed to grow up. So, unfortunately, is probably not that accurate. But given the fact that Plutarch himself said it, you can't really have a go at the comic or the film for stating that this happened, because there is kind of historical backing. The film says that at the age of 7, they get taken away from their mothers for a form of training, and this is in the agoge, or agoga, or however you want to pronounce it. It varies depending on what kind of Greek you're looking at, and then obviously a modern day translation. So, according to Xenophon, this was a very real thing, and it was established in the 6th or 7th century BC by the semi-mythical lawgiver named Lycurgus. And yes, this training did start at the age of 7, so that is fully correct. This training was designed to cultivate loyalty, military skills, and they even did some dancing, which sounds pretty fun. In the film, they highlight the values of never retreat, never surrender, and the fact that death in battle is the most glorious you could achieve. And this is generally the principles behind this training. However, they obviously did not always achieve this. Famously, at the Battle of Sparta, they did the exact opposite. So they are just principles to aim for, but they still didn't always do it. Another key idea in the training that they mention is the fact that they're basically being starved, and this was true. Again, Xenophon said that they've given very, very small amounts of food. And basically this forced the children to have to steal more for themselves. And if they did so successfully, great. If they were caught, it was double punishment, because not only were you bad at stealing, but you had been stealing. They wanted to encourage this behaviour because it could help with certain military tactics. Generally, some other sources also talk that it may have kept them slim and healthy, and some thought that they might grow up to be taller if they did this. Then, at the age of 15, we see King Leonidas being left out in the wilderness to fight this wolf. Kind of true. They would have had to bear the wilderness just in groups instead of by themselves, because that seems a little bit pointless given in the military you're always going to be in a group, and we want to encourage this kind of camaraderie, not individuality. Finally, as a general comment on the spirit of this training as well, there's a really cool phrase which is almost an exact translation of Plutarch. And this is when his wife says to him when he's leaving for war, "Bring back your shield or come back on it." Basically, you come back successful or you're dead, but with your shield. Because if you don't have your shield, then what happens is you let down this phalanx structure. In this structure, you are one unit, and your shield doesn't actually protect yourself, it protects the next person. So if you've lost this shield, you're letting down your team. So you always have to have it, and that was a sign of great responsibility and good military skill. Finally, one important point is the fact that kings generally wouldn't have gone through this training. However, we have the exception with King Leonidas. And this is because he wasn't the first in line to the throne. He actually succeeded his half-brother Cleomenes I. Let's talk a little bit more about King Leonidas. This was a real Spartan king, and he is born in 540 BCE and then dies in 480 BCE. He becomes king in 489 BCE. And yes, because of this timing, he was a very notable leader during the Second Persian Wars, and specifically at the Battle of Thermopylae. And that's what this narrative is generally about. We focus on this battle called Thermopylae. Yes, he was married to a woman named Gorgo. However, towards the beginning of the film, when this narrative really starts to kick off, we see him reject the envoy of Xerxes. Not only reject, but kill and shove down a well. It's pretty dramatic. And that, as I said, we have the iconic line,
"This is Sparta."
However, did not happen. They did send a message to the man who was king before him, and that didn't go very well. But this is why they didn't send one to Leonidas, and he never received this. Something they generally omit about this character as well is that he wasn't the only king. Sparta would always have 2 co-regents, which they just don't really show, which kind of changes the power dynamic. Let's talk about the Ephors, which he goes to for advice with this war and kind of approval. I'm pretty sure in the film there's 5 of them, and that is right, there was 5 in this council. They were elected by the public for these roles. However, beyond this, it's not great. They didn't, in the film, I'll show you what they looked like, and there's no evidence that they wouldn't just look like what Leonidas looks like. There's also no evidence that they opposed Leonidas in his decision. It's actually more evidence to support that they supported this. However, they did consult the Oracle of Delphi with their decision. In the film, she's called Pythia, this is also the name of the Oracle of Delphi, and she delivers a similar prophecy of doom and death. Let's talk about some of the other main characters. Delos, the man who gets sent back to Sparta at the end of the film to deliver the message from Leonidas, was actually a real fighter in this war, and he was one of 2 people to survive the battle. His real full name was Aristodemus. He sent back on the principle that he had ended up being blinded in one eye during one of their earlier altercations, and the film does show this. He comes back with one eye. He also comes back with a man called Eurytus in the reality, which they don't show. This may be because in reality he does just go back to Sparta, whereas this other man, having been sent away, still returns to fight and has an honourable death. Unfortunately, Delos does not. In the film, he's not depicted in a negative light at all. In reality, he was shunned from Spartan society. Even though he was injured, that's not what you're meant to do. Even if you've been sent back, you should carry on fighting. In the film, we do see him at the Battle of Plataea, and this is true, and this is kind of where he redeems himself in historical reality. Ephialtes, the man who is deformed at birth, somehow survives, and then betrays the Spartans. This again is a real historical figure. This is a man who was Spartan and was bribed by the Persians to try and give them information, and it is eventually what killed the rest of them. However, he wasn't deformed at birth and left for dead. That's just a good narrative for the comic. During one of their epic battles, they talk about the immortal soldiers of Xerxes. And this is kind of true. The histories of Herodotus discuss an infantry of 10,000 Persian soldiers, and he does call them the Immortals. Obviously, they're not actually these weird immortal creatures that the films show, but the name is right. And they are super powerful because Herodotus states that every time one of them is even slightly injured, they are replaced. So it stays this heavy unit of 10,000 fantastic fighters. As a side note though, however, some scholars have since debated whether he basically mistranslated their name from the Persian, and they may have not been called Immortals but just comrades. But this is still debated. But it's great because these soldiers did appear in this Second Persian War, and specifically they were at Thermopylae. And of course, the Persian army is led by King Xerxes, and this was a very real Persian king, and this was the king during the Battle of Thermopylae, so that all is pretty correct. He was king from 518 BC to 465 BCE. And the film mentions that he is the son of Darius of the Persians, and this is also correct. Generally, the way in which they depict the Persian goals and outlook is also pretty right. The king was believed to be a living god, and they believed that it was their right to conquer the known world. It was their duty, in fact, that they had to conquer these places. And the way in which they speak about giving earth and water was a very real phrase that we find in inscriptions and texts as a code for submission. Finally, the Battle of Thermopylae, the very battle in which this final narrative is based. This is a real battle, and it does generally follow this plotline. First of all, yes, there were 300 Spartans in this battle, hence the title 300 and this entire narrative, so that is accurate. Aside from the fact that they are shown to be the only ones fighting the Persians, especially in the final part, everybody else leaves. That's not true. Many other Greeks also fought with them. While the king did send a lot of them away before the final battle, many still remained. There were 700 Thespians, 900 Helots, and 400 Thebans, alongside the 300 Spartans. So it was a little bit over-dramatized, but you can allow that for a film. A cool bit that the film has taken directly from Plutarch as well is the idea of this cloud of arrows suddenly coming over from the Persian forces to land on them. And Leonidas says, wouldn't it be nice to fight them in the shade, referring to the fact that they just use their shields as a defence ahead of all of them, and they're fighting in the shade. And this is a direct quote, which is quite cool. When we see Xerxes and Leonidas meet to have this discussion, that did not happen. In reality, he just sent a messenger to him, but the conversation between the messenger and Leonidas is pretty similar to the conversation between Xerxes and Leonidas, basically giving him one less chance to just submit to him, and him going, nah, that is not gonna happen. And that is everything we're going to have time for today. So I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for watching. Bye!